Eurasia, the world's largest landmass. Some 10,000 kilometers from the Pacific to the Atlantic Oceans. A formidable distance even in today's world. And yet over that vast distance, human beings have pursued one of history's greatest enterprises. The Silk Road. A tremendously profitable trade route, and so much more. For thousands of years, exotic goods, new technologies, conquering armies, and brilliant ideas traveled along the Silk Road. Silk Road trade helped to build empires and to break them. It fanned the fires of revolution, drove great explorations, and forged powerful bonds between faraway peoples.
The Silk Road made human beings realize that there are other people out there, and it opened the eyes of the East and the West.
This is the story of how Silk Road trade made so much more than money. It's the epic tale of how the Silk Road helped create a world that created us. But only if bow makers could solve a very big problem. How to keep such a powerful bow, made from so many different materials, from breaking up when its own power was pulling it apart. Somewhere in Eurasia, some time long ago, some unknown genius discovered the answer.
This is the swim bladder of a sturgeon, fish from the Black Sea. And if you start to break these up, then put it in hot water, and you get this wonderful viscous glue. This simple idea of making a glue out of a swim bladder of a fish was a technological breakthrough of immense consequences. It is what enabled the composite bow to exist. And in turn, the composite bow was a military revolution of far-reaching consequences.
The composite recurved bow gave birth to a new kind of warrior, the horse archer.
The horse archer was able to shoot from the saddle, in part because of the new technology of the composite bow. They were short, compact bows, and that meant that you can shoot them from horseback. You see, I can cross to the other side of the horse, I can turn and shoot behind. It's much more suitable for shooting on horseback.
Everyone who fought with Eurasian nomads, whether as enemy or friend, wanted a recurved composite bow. By the early first millennium BCE, it was in use from East Asia to Eastern Europe. A recurved bow gave a horse archer unprecedented killing power. But it didn't make him a cavalryman. Before horse archers could fight as an effective military force, they needed a large supply of identical arrows. And that didn't exist.
Arrowheads were a variety of different sizes and weights. Some were made of bone, some were made out of flint, some were made out of bronze. All of them would be individually made, and you had to adjust your shot for the weight of different arrows. Also, a unit of soldiers who were firing at the same time would be firing arrows of slightly different weights, and they might go different distances.
这个石头做的箭头呢，它只能是用绳子，或者是呢用这个 牛筋拴这个箭足上面，有啥这个不太有利这个条件呢？它容易方向改变。第二的话呢，它容易掉落。
One of the technological innovations was the invention of the socketed arrowhead. They were made of bronze, usually, and they were made in a mold and cast in a mold so that an infinite number of socketed arrowheads of the same weight could be made from the same mold. Making socketed projectile points was actually a big deal. You have to have a mold with a core where the socket is going to be that you can pour molten metal around so that it's the same thickness all the way around.
Making arrowheads of the same size and weight was another Central Asian technological revolution. For the first time, mounted warriors could unleash coordinated arrow attacks on their enemies.
With arrowheads of the same weight, every time you drew the bow to shoot, you knew that you were firing an arrow that was exactly the same weight as the last arrow that you fired, so you could determine the range and the distance well. And also, all of the archers that were firing arrowheads of the same weight at the same time. So the distance for all of them would be the same.
套装的箭足后边，它可以把这个箭杆呢，可以直接套在里边，哎，变成是这种这个箭足了。这个箭足有啥优点呢？第一，它不会失去方向，啊。第二的话呢，它不容易掉落，所以大大的提高了对这个弓箭的这个杀伤力和这个有效的利用它这个价值。
Archaeologists believe that sometime in the second millennium BCE, socketed bronze arrowheads began spreading east, while the composite recurved bow spread west. Sometime around 900 BCE, socketed arrowheads and recurved bows met in the Tarim Basin area of Central Asia. Brought together by traders, warriors, and migrating nomads.
After about 700 BC, you begin to see really thousands and thousands of arrowheads and dozens of arrowheads in a single quiver in a grave. It's like they're being mass-produced.
Bronze socketed arrowheads turned Central Asia into an arsenal. But cavalry still couldn't exist until warriors could become soldiers.
It was really the age of heroic warfare, individuals going out and doing great deeds by themselves and attracting glory for their own name. And this is the kind of warfare that's described in the Iliad and the Odyssey, or in the Rig Veda, religious text that's at the deep roots of modern Hinduism. What had to change was the psychological change in the nature of the warrior. It had to change from individuals to units working under the command of a commanding general who would attack and retreat upon command. The psychological change from the heroic warrior to the soldier probably is a feature of urban warfare, the armies that were associated with the great cities of Mesopotamia and Iran. That psychology had to spread northward, up into the steppes, and be accepted by warriors in the steppes, in the same area where the recurved bows and the socketed arrowheads were crossing.
While recurved bows were spreading west and socketed arrowheads were spreading east, the concept of military discipline was spreading north. Sometime around 900 BCE, all three combined in the heart of Central Asia.
When those three things came together, cavalry became a really deadly form of military force.
A force that would severely test the ancient world's most powerful armies. 2,000 years ago, as the Romans pushed east to expand their empire, China was pushing west. And like the Romans, the Chinese encountered a formidable enemy on horseback. The Xiongnu were nomads from the Central Asian steppes. Armed with recurved bows and socketed arrows, they fought under commanders as a disciplined military force. They raided Chinese villages and plundered the growing trade between East and West. And no one could stop them.
The Xiongnu was the migraine of the ancient world for the Chinese. They simply just kept coming, and they would not stop. The Xiongnu wanted the finest material goods produced by the Chinese. That is why they raided.
Imagine you're a villager in China and these men come from nowhere. They come from over the hill without warning, tearing into your village. They shoot the headman, they shoot your husband, they chase the women out. There is no hiding place. In a flurry of dust and arrows, they're in and they're out and they take the stuff and they go.
China sent its military might against the Xiongnu. The famed terracotta warriors reveal the size and power of Chinese armies. But the Chinese fought on foot and from chariots. Not effective against hit-and-run cavalry. A Chinese courtier wrote that the Xiongnu moved like a flock of birds over the land, impossible to control.
Once mounted warfare really became deadly and effective, it became a real problem. If you're a farmer, the nomads know where you're going to be all the time. Your house is in the same place 12 months of the year, and when your crops become ripe, you have to harvest them. And the nomads know when that season is. Whereas when you're trying to strike them back, it's impossible to know where they're going to be or when they're going to be there. You have to search to find them.
To beat the Xiongnu, the Chinese needed soldiers who could fight like them. They needed cavalry.
There are manuals of warfare that were written to instruct Chinese warriors on how to counter the tactics and the methods of the Xiongnu. Those manuals introduced the idea of cavalry to the Chinese military. The Chinese military had not really used cavalry before about probably 350 BC.
The Chinese military, at first with some resistance from the old aristocratic families, said, well, my father fought on a chariot and his father fought on a chariot and I'm going to fight on a chariot in my long robes like my ancestors.
But it wasn't long before Chinese warriors traded their traditional long flowing robes for shorter tunics that didn't get in the way of fighting on horseback.
Eventually, the practicalities forced them to get rid of their robes, to put on riding trousers, to learn to shoot the bow on horseback, and they too became a mighty horse archer force.
Chinese cavalry became experts at shooting the recurved composite bow. And a lethal Chinese weapon, the crossbow. While its cavalry trained, China agreed to Xiongnu demands for payments of money and silk until the year 133 BCE, when Emperor Han Wudi refused to pay and sent his army to attack the Xiongnu. Chinese cavalry defeated the nomads, and China seized new territories in the steppes, pacifying trade routes and opening new horizons.
On one hand, we have this perpetual conflict in Chinese culture will be the Xiongnu and the Han Chinese that created incessant warfare. On the other hand, it is this conflict that demolished physical boundaries. Even territory boundaries were constantly being pushed farther, pushed back between the two forces. This was a stimulus for exchanges, for political changes, for new ideas, for artistic traditions.